This book was written back in 1964. It's called None Dare Call It Treason by John A. Stormer. 1964 is a year of crisis and decision. Will America continue to aid the communist enemy, to disarm us in the face of danger, to bow before communist dictators in every corner of the earth? Back us up just a little bit. I guess that's too much, kind of hard to read. But ever since they released those memos from the Democratic Party, which Democrats means communist in anybody's book, been a lot of stuff going on, and things are starting to get very seriously. Why? Because they are communist. Make no mistake about that. The Democrats are communists. If they were real Americans, wouldn't they be working together with other Americans to make America better? But no, they're not. You've got to get those Democratic communists out of office. Hook, line, or sinker. It don't matter how they go. Nobody cares. They just got to go. None dare call it treason is careful complication of facts from hundreds of congressional investigations of communism and dozens of books. It dissects the failures of the Eisenhower administration just as effectively as it details the blunders of Roosevelt, Truman, Kennedy, and Johnson. It documents the current decay in American schools, churches, and the press, which has been conditioning the American people to accept this for 20 years. J. Edgar Hoover warned repeatedly, "We're at war with the communists, and sooner or later, every red-blooded American realizes this, the safer we're going to be." They have infiltrated every conceivable sphere of activity: youth groups, radio, television, and motion pictures industry, church, school, educational, cultural groups, the press, national minority groups, and civil and political units. Now McCarthy tried to warn us a long time ago. Nobody listened. And they come out and they put this in the congressional records, January 10th, 1963, about the communist goals. Nobody paid attention to it. Well, it's not hurting us right now. I mean, if you have an enemy that's coming right at you, automatically you're going to fight him. You're going to fight him. But if they come at you a little bit at a time where it's not really provoking you, you let it slide. And that's what's happened to America since the 60s. We let this slide, and all this time they've been sneaking their communist agents into every aspect of our lives. Doesn't matter what it is. Now, one of the things that they wanted you have to disarm America. You can't disarm anybody and make them slaves unless they are disarmed. Well, they got into politics, and 1934 we had the National Firearms Act. 1938 the Federal Firearm Act. 1968 the Gun Control Act. Now listen to this, people. Now this was the 1968 Gun Control Act was right here. Sterling evidence suggests that the Gun Control Act of 1968 was lifted almost in its entirety from the Nazi legislation of 1938. You understanding that? Okay, well they added a few things too. Yes, they did. The Gun Control Act of 1968, it absolutely prohibits the mere possession of a firearm by various classes of citizens. Imagine that. Those who have been convicted of a felony, a veteran who received a dishonorable discharge, anybody that's mentally incompetent, illegal aliens, persons who have renounced their citizenship, and users of illegal drugs, including marijuana. 1968. Keep this in your head. 1986, they come out with this Protection Act, but that was also the year that Reagan and Brady and them, they got shot. Remember, with the handgun? Well, then in 1988, they come out with an undetectable handgun law. In 1993, you come out with the Brady Bill. 1994, they come out with that Public Safety Crime Bill. You know, that 1,000 feet from a school with a firearm. Then in 1996, they give it the Domestic Violence Act bill, which it was totally unconstitutional. You can't, have somebody that's a misdemeanor back before 96, and then suddenly in 1996 you're created like a felon. Well, anything that conflicts with the Constitution of the United States is null and void. But they put that in there. They knew that they could slide this thing by and a whole lot of stink wouldn't be raised by it. Now, back in the day, Blackstone said he placed the right to bear arms, the absolute right of individuals at the common law. He described the right to bear arms as being for self-protection, self-preservation, and defense. And also being it's the primary law of nature, which cannot be taken away by the law of society. The natural right of resistance and self-protection when sanctions of society and law are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression. Now that little line there reminded me of out there at Bundy's. If those people hadn't been out there helping the Bundys, I'm sure that the Bundys would have been massacred. The purpose of every line of the Bill of Rights was to protect the people from the state. Our founders refused to ratify a constitution that didn't protect individual liberties. Now, the other day, Daniel, he put out a video about guns and Christians and guns. I think that was in the title. And he was saying, you know, he thought everyone should have a gun, and I thought, well, something else I want to add to it. Anybody who believes it's wrong to arm himself against the criminal violence shows contempt of God's gift of life. The person doesn't value himself, nor does he live up to his responsibilities to his family and community, and proclaims himself mentally and morally deficient because he does not himself have to behave responsibly. I want you to know something else. It's unconstitutional to legislate a right out of existence. There has to be an amendment to alter it. So most of these gun laws, totally unconstitutional. You got to remember the framers of our Constitution were born and brought up in the atmosphere of common law, and they spoke its vocabulary. When it came to put their conclusion to the form of a fundamental law into a compact draft, they expressed themselves in terms of the common law, confident that they could be shortly and easily understood. The language of the Constitution cannot be interpreted safety except by reference to the common law as when the instrument was framed and adopted. They have to carry themselves back to a time when the Constitution was adopted and recollect the spirit manifested in those debates instead of trying that meaning that can be trying to squeeze what meaning they can out of the text or inventing something against that text. They just need to conform to the probable one, which was the one that was passed. Also, you know, people say, well, the militia is now the National Guard. That is not true. National Guard can't possibly be interpreted as the whole constitutional militia expressed in the Second Amendment. For no other reason, the Guardsmen are prohibited by law from keeping their own military arms. The firearms are owned and annually inventoried by the federal government and kept in inventory under lock and key. So that leaves us with the regular militia to preserve our liberties. And like I said, we have a lot of communists going on right now. They've used these spin doctors since I don't know when, since the Clintons. The Clintons are communists. They grew up in the Marxist atmosphere of the time. Bill and Hillary both, and all these Democrats, all of them. They're all in the same boat. If they would have jumped ship and acted like they were real Americans and voted American and come together to make our country great, I'd have stood up for them. But these people are our enemy. They are the treasonous bastards that you could ever think of. I'm not kidding you about that Gun Control Act, people. Here's something else while I'm right on this thing about I think this is why Scalia got killed. As he said here, felons may possess guns unless state explicitly prohibits it. The right to gun ownership is an individual right. It's not a collective. So keep that in mind when they're trying to bend the Constitution in any manner they can. Like I said, they're trying to squeeze what meaning that they want to squeeze out of it and make you believe it. They use their spin doctors to keep spinning around over and over and over and over until you start believing it. Pick up a copy of the Constitution and read it. For God's sakes, read it. I'm going to read this one more time about, I was talking about your gun rights and stuff and Christian values. But if somebody who believes it is wrong to arm himself against the criminal violence and shows contempt of God's gift of life, that person does not value himself, nor does he live up to his responsibilities to his family and the community. He proclaims himself mentally and morally deficient because he does not himself have to behave responsibly. Thanks for listening.